Welcome to LA Social Science. It's an e-forum created by the Division of Social Sciences here at UCLA to create conversations that connect our amazing scholars here at UCLA with the local community and beyond. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to one of UCLA's genius professors, Dr. Raul Hinojosa. Dr. Hinojosa, how are you today?
I'm great. Good to be with you, man.
Thank you for making some time for us. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to get a chance to talk about your upcoming conference, Empowering the Diasporas to Address Root Causes, 25 years of UCLA in a IDs Center for Research and Innovation. I know that conference is coming up this Friday, and I know that you've had two prior to this conference. So if you could tell us a little bit about, the center's research and policy innovations, which, three panels of research, the policies and community leaders from the United States, Mexico, and Central America are planned to be at this conference. And then some of the highlights of recent publications and current pilot policies and pilot projects that the center has put forth.
Great, Otis. Thank you. Well, I can tell you that the North American Integration and Development Center has been around for 25 years. We founded it at UCLA in Chicano studies in particular, which was an emerging field at that time, to analyze and engage the historical natural experiment that you see behind me, this inequality between the United States and Mexico right next to one another, one of the most unequal parts of the world. How did that come to be? And what do we understand about this relationship between US, Mexico, this border, which has really been at the front line of over 500 years of encounter between European and indigenous histories? They're sharing a borderline between emerging rich and poor countries, unequal, but it has always been highly racialized. And in many ways, North America represents the challenge of globalization over the last 500 years, as well. And more importantly, it's the future of the 21st century in many ways, presetting the agenda for environmental and equitable sustainability in the planet going forward, but in a context of deep inequality and in a context of this week with a racialized ethno-nationalism emerging around the world. Yeah. How do we understand our laboratory here in North America in this global perspective? And I'll talk more about at the end how we're expanding actually in terms of a global comparative perspective. Wow. But, I'd say the NAID Center was designed to tackle this really complex political economy of this integration between rich and poor countries that we see at this border. That Mexico and the United States, from a variety of perspectives, need to be teaching us great lessons. There's theoretical dynamics of how we see rich and poor countries engaging in the world and how we need to model this political economy interaction. I spent a lot of time on empirically based research with modeling, both in terms of historical dynamics, but more importantly, how we project into the future scenarios between the United States and Mexico and what it teaches us to the world. So the other thing about the NAID Center is that we also see it as a very engaged laboratory for policy, politics, and social empowerment of the communities that we work with in this context of racialized dynamics across borders. So as you see along this border, people are right there waiting to cross the border, probably to meet their family that's waiting on the other side. What we need to understand is not only the historical dynamics, but we need to look at a critique of and provide an alternative of the divisions in the world that represent this border, this emerging ethno-nationalism, which we saw 25 years ago and tried to warn against. And how do we propose new visions, solutions of inclusive and equitable development across these borders? So, the work of the NAID Center has very focused on a couple of things. Particularly, we looked at trade, investment, migration, and remittances, right? Which are very complex
Hmm.
transnational dynamics in the world today. And they needed a great deal of theoretical and empirical work in order to do proper policy development. Now, from our perspective, we saw and we still see that there's a huge danger in getting this wrong. It's very easy to demagogue these issues, as we just see in the last 5 years. And in fact, what we've tried to do is, how do we look at this unequal and racialized international relationship between Mexico and the United States, identify not only the policy theoretical errors, but how do we put together a vision of what we call reversing the vicious cycles that exist across borders, and
Hmm.
create new visions of virtuous cycles, that policies that could generate equitable and inclusive development. In many ways, we consciously created this center with a critique of these emerging ethno-nationalist narratives, anti-immigration, these notions of racializing trade as if it's them against us. So I did a recent book called The Trump Paradox,
Hmm.
which published by University of California Press, which looks at migration, trade in these racialized dynamics. And it was very much rooted in this 25 years of research.
Hmm.
So our feeling is that this lack of well-researched theoretical and empirical understanding can lead to misinformation, and in fact feeds false racialized narratives of what are the roots of these inequalities. Blaming trade and migrants has huge consequences and can miss the point of how we create an alternative future going forward. So that's what we're trying to do at this conference.
Yeah, no, and thank you for that. And, and also giving us an understanding of the Nate Center. I think you all are doing fantastic work there. And I know that a lot of what happens at these conferences are, the work that you all have been doing for 25 years there at the center. Now, I also I'm thankful that you mentioned your book, because I know that first panel from one of the conferences in the past, or is this the conference coming up? One of those panels highlights um, some of the writing that comes out of that North American Development Bank history. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, great. In fact, I created the Nate Center 25 years ago at the same time that I was working in Washington,
Mm.
working with, at that point, President Clinton as an advisor on North American integration. At that point, you may remember there was a big discussion about NAFTA,
Mm-hmm.
and about migration policy as well. And what we tried to say is that, look, Mr. President, we need to have an alternative vision of what North American integration should be about. He was a Rhodes Scholar. We talked a lot about this, that the European Union had a very different perspective on how to integrate rich and poor countries. It wasn't just about pure free trade, like my professors at University of Chicago would point out. I actually was a big critic of the potential negative impacts of free trade.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also pointing out that these are issues that are manageable. They should not be led to foster and create greater divisions between countries, but rather as an opportunity really to understand the real dynamics of the trade, migration, relationships between the countries. So we proposed this idea of a North American Development Bank, very much
Mm-hmm.
inspired by the European experiment of the European Regional Development Funds and the European Bank. And I also worked very closely with members of Congress. In fact, at UCLA, we had Congressman Esteban Torres, who recently passed away, came to my class at UCLA, and I proposed to him the idea I'd been working on, and he loved it. And he said, I am the leader of the opposition against NAFTA, but
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying, Hinojosa, makes a great deal of sense. I was in the army in Europe, and I know the consequences of what you're speaking about and what the European Union did to create a lasting peace. So he endorsed this idea of being a critic of NAFTA, and thinking, frankly, that it was not going to happen. All right. But
Mhm.
Bill Clinton said, you know what, Congressman Hinojosa, you have a great idea. Let's do this. Let's propose it. Let's put it in front of Congress. And in fact, what we saw is that the NADBank was created as a part of the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Mm.
Our research from that point on said, look, let's be very clear. There's going to be negative consequences for some communities in the United States that were probably going to lose jobs, had been losing jobs anyway for decades. But at least this way, we can create funding to create an alternative economy for resilience, for repairing the impact that the United States faces in the context of globalization. And I also pointed out that NADBank should also focus on the future of addressing the root causes of migration. All of this was included in there. The book that we now published, 25 years of the NADBank, is interesting because it actually shows that we were spot on in the mapping of what communities were going to actually potentially have some employment negative impacts. And they were throughout the United States. And we also pointed out how migration was going to be a much bigger issue than trade, but we needed to do both. The 25 years of the NADBank has now produced over $10 billion in projects along the US-Mexican border, mostly environmental projects to address the consequences of increased trade, and over $500 million in communities throughout the United States that we highlight in the book as case studies of how the NADBank tried very new strategies for community engagement in identifying the job losses potentially and thinking about a resilient economy going forward, something that's going to be really important as we hit climate change, of which there's also going to be huge amounts of employment displacement going forward. But back then we were looking at trade. And frankly, we were trying to say, look, let's address this head on before NAFTA becomes the boogeyman that eats everybody's consciousness of US-Mexico relations. Well, Donald Trump used that as the boogeyman, as we know, unfortunately. The book points out that this is unnecessary. We can look at the relationships between the United States and Mexico, create equitable trade relationships that enhance economic development, not just for multinational corporations, but particularly for the communities that we can methodologically and empirically identify them. So the book highlights this history, and it also, we were the first ones to identify exactly the job losses. We were the first ones to also link NAFTA and migration. The research that we did showed if you're not careful, there will be potentially more migration displacement if agriculture in Mexico is not addressed. So this work had a great deal of influence in reducing the rapid acceleration of free trade in agriculture, and in fact, postponed all agricultural liberalization until 10 years, 15 years after the start of NAFTA. Our research now in the book shows that we were right on both counts, both in terms of identifying the job losses and then putting forth money that could address those job losses and mechanisms for addressing the agricultural dynamics to prevent large-scale displacement and migration from Mexico.
Now, I just want to make sure I make a connection here because I keep referring to panels and the conference, and you're going to give a lot of this research and history within those conferences. Like I said, 2 have already happened. 1's happening Friday. This is what participants who are going to come out to these conferences, this is the type of information they're going to receive, correct?
Correct. Actually, there's 3 panels in the one conference. So the first panel is all about the NADBank, and there will be members of Congress. There'll be Mexican members of the Senate there. And we will also be having the head of the North American Development Bank, who is housed in San Antonio, Texas, will
Mhm.
be there, as well as other commentators from Washington. The second panel is the next step, this issue of how can the NADBank create and address policies for addressing the root causes of migration. That's
Hmm.
panel number 2.
And can you tell us, I mean, let us go, let's go. Tell me more about that. I mean, because,
Well,
you know, I know that a lot of this, right, this conversation gets thrown around as a political football, and you have one side saying, you know, something, and you have a little bit of a deeper, you know, dive going on the other. But unfortunately, we get lost in the shuffle. So, you know, that second panel, you know, talking about, you know, all of these things that are really the causes of why. I would love for you to break that down for us, right?
thank you. Yeah, yeah. No, in fact, what we're doing in the second panel, we're releasing a new monograph that's being published by the Migration Policy Institute, probably the premier policy institute in Washington, D.C. on migration, in conjunction with the Nate Center and a whole group of community-based financial institutions in Mexico and Central America.
Mm.
Because our notion here is that there's a missing link, and we're working with the vice president's office, members of her staff, which will also be at this conference, to address the root causes of migration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, how do we depoliticize this dynamic and take it out of the racialized dynamic and look at, are there ways that we can understand root causes, and are there ways that we can address policies, cooperation across borders that empowers immigrants to address the root causes, which is what the conference is about, which is what the book, the new book that we're releasing is about. And it's very interesting what we've done there. And we're going to be releasing a database that is being launched on Friday at the UCLA Nate Center, which has a detailed analysis of every single municipality in Mexico and Central America to zip codes in the United States, that we understand the patterns of migration and the patterns of remittances back and forth. Right. And there allows us to understand the interesting differences, inequalities within Mexico and Central America to the communities in the United States, and being able to measure their impacts of migration in the United States, and how we can think of literally what are billions, over close to 100 billion in remittances going back. Could that be useful for addressing the root causes of a lack of economic opportunity and inequality that leads to migration? So this database, we've actually used it in the book to analyze the root causes. And we find something very interesting using econometric and regression analysis, that the number one causes of migration, obviously, are income inequality, but they're very much rooted in the way in which communities are linked to one another through families and through social networks. And that the remittances that go back to the villages is also very much based on this social network. Now, what we see is that under the current circumstances, where we have undocumented immigration, right, where people don't have rights, their wages are depressed in the United States. And that ironically creates what we're calling a vicious cycle. There's greater demand for cheap migrants on the one hand, so that we perpetuate more migration by not giving immigrants rights. We need the immigrants. In fact, we document literally close to $1 trillion in economic benefit to the United States from these migrants from Mexico and Central America. We need them. There's no way in fact, we study what would happen if we had a day without a Mexican, a movie I did, by the way, with that title, you know, that we still have to talk about today because people still think that that's a solution. Getting rid of immigrants would be a disaster, the worst economic depression in the history of the United States. And in fact, we depend on them.
I'm gonna need you to say that one more time, Professor. I'm gonna need you to say that one more time, just a little bit louder.
We need immigrants. We depend on immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Economy, the regions of the United States with more migrants benefit the most from undocumented migrants. They are the ones who are not against immigration. They want more immigration. The
Mm-hmm.
Trump paradox shows that it's the areas with the least migrants with the worst attitudes about migration. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
we need immigrants. It produces over $1 trillion in GDP in the United States. But by having a broken immigration system, we use these immigrants and we exploit these immigrants at lower wages, which actually creates a vicious cycle of importing more immigrants. Now, the other part of the vicious cycle that we look at is the remittances. People
Mm-hmm.
don't understand this. The United States immigrants here send back to Central America and Mexico close to $75 billion a year directly into those villages where they're coming from. Now, this could potentially be a good thing, except the problem is immigrants today in the United States don't have access to financial services. They
Mm-hmm.
can't get bank accounts. So they have to depend on the Western unions of the world, the cash to cash remittances.
Mm-hmm.
Virtually all this $75 billion is going and ends up in these communities in cash. What we have analyzed is that this is a vicious cycle as well. It's
Yeah.
called the Dutch disease. It actually creates inflation, external dependence, and ironically reduces investments in those villages that start this process of migration and cash remittances and generates even more out migration.
Right.
So the conference also focuses on what we're calling the virtuous cycle.
Mm.
How do we have an alternative vision of policy? Can
Yeah.
policy make a difference?
Yeah.
And here, what's interesting about the book is that it shows that immigration reform is not a favor you do for immigrants. It's something that benefits the United States.
Mm-hmm.
The idea here, we've been leading the research with the Congressional Budget Office and many other top research centers for years that show that immigration reform would create $1.5 trillion in economic benefit for the United States. All right.
Right.
And this is throughout. So we have to move away, give immigrant rights, let them incorporate into the economy. This makes even immigrants even more valuable without having this horrible situation of very unequal low income that they're facing. The immigration in the past that has been legalized, we saw after 1986, for example, created an entire generation of people that became homeowners, business owners, and their kids went to UCLA, many of them my
Mm-hmm.
students, that had an incredibly positive economic impact. We can do this again now. The second part of the virtuous cycle addresses this question of remittances.
Yeah.
So we project out over the next 10 years that there will be $1 trillion in economic and remittances to Mexico and Central America.
Mm-hmm.
By eliminating the cost of immigration, by eliminating the cost of remittances, which today is almost 10%, we could add another $100 billion in addition to those trillion into economic development for those communities at home.
Right.
That we show could reduce and address the root causes of migration. But there's a big problem, and which has a solution. Right now, many of these communities are not accessed banking in the United States or in Mexico and Central America. But fortunately, there's technology, right? We now have, these cell phones that we can't live without. Well, It turns out these can be the vehicle by which, and we have figured out the technology working with these groups that will be at the conference to use cell phone technology to eliminate the cost of remittances and have the remittances go directly into savings accounts in these community-based financial institutions, which can then convert remittances into savings because that's what immigrants want. They want to save money. They want to be able to plan for their future and then have these resources available to create sustainable economic development. The interesting thing about that our research also shows is that if migration is being generated from those areas undergoing very rapid environmental degradation. And in fact, when people leave the agricultural sector, it even increases environmental degradation. So the answer is use these $1 trillion of remittances going forward to as a savings, what we're calling the migrant savings bonds, in conjunction with the NADBank and other resources to leverage to create an unprecedented amount of resources for sustainable environmental and equitable development in these villages. That's what people want, and that's what they're sacrificing their families for. And we show in this book as a policy strategy that we now, at the third part of the conference, shows actual case studies of how this will work.
And that was going to be my next question. Please, you've told us the history of NAD, in that first panel. You give us, some of those root causes and the why in those second, panels. Now, in the third, now we talk about the thing that I know you're about, which is the solution. So, tell us a little bit about what those third panels are going to introduce to us as, conference.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm super proud to be able to do this third panel, because what we do in this panel is actually what we are called the engaged social science. How do we take this theoretical research, this empirical work, and create alternative visions, but then turn around and actually build the solution? So the solution is, how do we create networks of microbanks throughout Mexico and Central America? Well, in Baja California, about 300 miles south of this border, is a place called San Quintin, which is a fascinating place. It's the largest agricultural export valley, sending fruit and vegetables to the United States, that brings in immigrants, indigenous immigrants from throughout Mexico and Central America. In fact, it's the most ethnically diverse, linguistically diverse place outside of Mexico City, and it's all agricultural workers working with American multinationals exporting to the United States, generating also a great deal of remittances. So what we did, and by the way, these immigrants are being trained in Mexico to become immigrants to the United States, and they are brought by these American multinationals to the United States to then go to the Central Valleys of California and do the picking of all of our products here. So we discovered this. We've been doing research on it, and then we partnered with indigenous microfinance institutions to create a new microbank in San Quintin. And the fascinating thing is, in less than a year, we went from going there for the first time, identifying the possibility of creating a bank, working with the indigenous communities locally, helping create their own microbank, which they're going to own, which is a part of this association, where we're going to be very fortunate to have the founder of this association, Isabel Cruz Hernandez, who's a Mixteca indigenous person herself, who went to the Sorbonne and got a master's in anthropology. She's been my partner for 25 years in these projects. We've launched now and is now operating a microbank in San Quintin. Now, what our plan is to, we got the North American Development Bank to help finance the expansion of this microbank. And the idea is to propose to members of Congress who will be at this event.
Sorry about that, Dad. So I'm sorry, please continue.
So I was saying that we're very fortunate to have at this conference, not only Isabel Cruz Hernandez, but also the leaders of the major community-based financial institutions in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador that are now replicating this model. And what we're proposing here is this notion of the savings bonds to capture these remittances, to help families on both sides of the border create wealth. They actually get 10% rate of return on their money by putting it in these savings bonds, which are then used with other resources to do a strategic planning in their communities, to have them engaged with local universities and UCLA to develop these alternative strategies. I should also say we're very proud to have this conference in conjunction with a new indigenous university being created in San Quintin, which is a part of a movement in Mexico with the new president to create community-based indigenous universities. And we'll also have a partner from a state called Oaxaca, creating a new indigenous university, Dr. Jaime Luna, who actually, it's interesting, these cycles turn back. I got involved in all of this 40 years ago when I was a graduate student at University of Chicago as an anthropologist, went to Oaxaca, worked with Jaime Luna villages, indigenous villages in the mountain, followed those migration paths to Los Angeles. All right. And that's one of the reasons I decided to come to UCLA, to be a part of creating and giving back to those communities which have taught me so much. And this is really what we're going to highlight at this conference, which we think has global implications.
Wow. I'm thankful. Thank you for, this discussion and talking about the conference. I also really appreciate the understanding of how, you yourself actually came back to, UCLA after, following through with the, the migration of your own journey in your scholarship. So finally, I wanted you to talk a little bit about how this conference is a part of a future trajectory for the center. And, just give us a little understanding of how, this is going to take over the world in a lot of ways.
Well, something we feel very strongly about, especially in this moment of global war, is that we take these lessons from North America and we do them in comparative perspectives around the world. So we're already working with research projects with partner universities in Europe and the Middle East, South Asia, and in China. And where we're looking at this dynamic of migration and remittances, and how the empowering of immigrants and the empowering of remittances can make a huge difference in fighting global climate change. Our analysis shows that today there's about 300 million migrants living outside their borders who are sending back money to over 1.5 billion of their family members around the world. In the next 10 years, these numbers of remittances could grow to between 5 to 10 trillion dollars, much more than all direct foreign investment and multilateral assistance. The question is, if we could use these funds in this technology to address the climate change challenge because the reality of it is migrants come from many of the frontline communities that are facing displacement that is going to create more migration. They are facing the front line of having to rebuild resilient communities. We don't have the resources to do that. Multinationals don't have it, but the people have it. The people can be empowered. And with new technologies and with new banking systems that are oriented to them, if we give them legal rights, if we give them access to technology and financial inclusion, we think that this is a game changer on a global scale. And it's a very important moment. We see Vice President Harris now leading the issue of root causes in North America, which is great. We're suggesting to her and to many people around the world, this is by the way, it's going to be a part of the COP conference, the climate change conference in Cairo this year and in Dubai the year after that. I was at Glasgow last year. This is now becoming the new issue. How do we work with the indigenous frontline communities, empower them as partners, it has to be as partners in addressing a more equitable and sustainable future. So we're looking forward to the next 25 years.
I am so thankful that I got a chance to speak with you today, Professor. Please tell us when the conference is happening again and the name. Give us the title of the conference if you can.
Yes, I will, and the title is called "Empowering Diaspora to Address Root Causes: 25 Years of the UCLA Nate Center Research and Innovation." It's going to be Friday, March 4th. I think there's going to be a link for people to register. It will all be on the Nate Center website and maybe the social science website. If you've missed the conference, you can always see what happened at the conference. But we're looking forward to creating more partnerships and more collaborations. And very importantly, at the community level, all the way to the major institutions, academic and policymakers around the world.
Right. And, just piggybacking on what Chairman Fred Hampton said, wherever there's people, there's power.